today. I thank you for everything that you provided each and every one of us. Lord, I pray that the words spoken tonight are yours, and they are not my own. In your name we pray. Amen. Okay, so tonight is the last night of our series that we've been doing, the Let It Go series. Okay, so tonight we're going to finish that up, and we got some interesting things in store. So tonight we're talking about a little bit something different, though, still along the same lines of the Let It Go. Now I want to tell you guys something. I'm pretty terrible at waiting on things. I just am. I'm not very patient. I don't like waiting on things. If I want something, I want it now. Why do I need to wait? I want it now, exactly. You see, when I turned 15 and I was able to get my permit, oh, I was so happy. But I couldn't believe I had to do all these hours of driving with somebody in the car. I just wanted my freedom. I wanted to hit the road. I was ready to go. I just could not wait to turn 16, get my own car, drive wherever I want, do whatever I want to do, and hit the road and have ultimate freedom. I just couldn't wait for it. Because I was very, very impatient. And frankly, I am sometimes. So maybe you guys know the feeling of being a little bit impatient, wanting what you want when you want it. Maybe you decide to finally ask that girl out. You know, you've been waiting and waiting, and you finally got the guts to ask her, and you call her up, and it goes straight to voicemail. Or maybe you finally decided what sport you want to play. And you're all excited, you've been practicing, you're still not the best, but you've been practicing as hard as you can, and then you find out that the team has the most intense tryouts that you've ever seen in your life. Or maybe you finally decide to take your schoolwork a little bit more seriously. Yeah, everybody laughs because we're going to go. Well, maybe you are trying. Maybe you're being a good little student. Maybe you're trying to take it a little bit more seriously, but as soon as you decide to do that, you realize you are going to have to ace every single test for the rest of the year, and you have a ton of makeup work to do, and it just becomes overwhelming. You see, essentially, in life, once a decision is made about something, the effects aren't necessarily immediate. Usually there's a long process involved. Okay, the past couple of weeks we've been talking about forgiveness. We said that while it is tempting to hold on to unforgiveness, to this grudge, unforgiveness ultimately holds on to us, right? And then we said that because God forgave us, we should forgive others. Remember? Forgiven people forgive. But maybe you found yourself deciding to forgive only to discover it isn't as simple as you thought it would be. The emotions of hurt, betrayal, and pain, they just don't go away. Maybe it's harder than you thought. Maybe you thought you were over it, but when you see the person who wronged you, who hurt you, or who offended you, maybe everything feels fresh again. It feels raw, like an open wound. Maybe you got over being dumped by your significant other. Maybe you thought you had forgiven. That is until you saw your ex with their brand new fling. The offense may as well happened all over again. Maybe you thought you had actually forgiven it, but then when something sparks that memory, those feelings come right back. That grudge comes right back. That anger comes right back. That hurt comes right back. So what do you do when you think you forgave, only to feel like nothing is really different? What do you do when you make the decision to forgive, but find there's more of a process involved than you first thought? Results, they're not immediate. They are not instantaneous. It's not going to happen in the blink of an eye, in the snap of fingers. It's not. It's never going to happen that way. It takes time. It takes a lot of time sometimes. In fact, you may find that when you thought you had forgiven someone, what you had really done was coped. You just dealt with it. You didn't get over it. You didn't move on. You didn't let it go. You just coped. Which explains why even though you made a decision in your heart for one thing, you feel like your feet are firmly planted where they were before you committed to forgiveness. Your feet are in the exact same place. So what do? How do we move past this pain? First thing we've got to do is we have to make a decision to heal. We don't let it happen to us. It's not going to just happen. We decide to go after it. We decide to make an effort towards it. If we just sit there and hope something amazing is going to happen, it's not. We have to actually do something about it. We have to step out of our comfort zone. We have to do whatever we have to do to reach it. Because it's not going to come to us. The question is, how do we heal? One of the things I love about the Bible is how much detail we get about some of the people in it. And that's the case with this guy named Joseph. When it comes to Joseph's story, we learn right away there's going to be some drama. Okay, in Genesis 37, verse 3, it tells us, now Israel, who is Joseph's dad, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. And he made a richly ornamented robe for him. Now this right here is a big parenting no-no. You don't let this happen. Okay? You don't play favorites. You don't ever play favorites. It's bad. It's a bad thing. Okay? But that's what Joseph's dad was doing right here. He was playing favorites with Joseph. And he wasn't afraid to let it show. Okay? And everyone knew that Joseph was the favorite. He was making it clear exactly who his favorite was. And surprisingly, it didn't sit too well with his brothers. So Joseph's dad gives him this fancy coat. And his brothers, they get mad. It didn't help that Joseph kind of rubbed it in. He rubbed his favor in and said, hey, Dad likes me the best, guys. You guys are just second to me. He just rubbed in that status of being favored by his dad. He had dreams where he was in charge of his entire family. And then he decided he'd tell them about it. He said, hey family, one day I'm going to be in charge of you. One day you're going to be bowing down to me. It's kind of hard to hear. I mean, what would some of you do if you had a sibling that came up to you and said, hey, one day I'm going to rule over you. You're going to bow down to me. It'd tick you off a little bit, right? Especially if it was your younger sibling. Okay? That's the thing here. Joseph was one of the youngest sons in the family. And he was making these huge controversial statements. So that's what made this such a big deal. Because usually in that culture, it went according to age. The brothers who were the oldest were usually the most respected. And down the line. They usually got the most. They usually were respected the most. Okay? So when little baby Joseph tells all of his older brothers, hey, one day I'm going to be ruling over you. You can imagine why that's a big problem. Okay? Some of Joseph's brothers were so mad that they actually wanted to kill him. They wanted Joseph dead. Reuben was kind of the voice of reason, sort of. And he talked them out of it. But what the alternative that he gave wasn't exactly kind either. He said, well, let's just throw him in a deep hole instead. You know, we won't kill him. Let's just throw him in a big hole and leave him. I mean, well, I guess that's a little bit better than killing him, but you're still throwing your brother into a giant hole and leaving him. You know, that way, they thought that way they wouldn't be directly responsible for his death. So it wouldn't be on their shoulders. But then some guys were traveling through. Okay? And they saw him. And they're coming by, and the brothers decide, you know, instead of just leaving him in this hole, why don't we make some money off of it? We'll sell him to those guys as a slave. So that's what they did. They sold their brother into slavery. And eventually Joseph ends below the Pharaoh, and then Moses was his servant. Okay? So from there, things got a little more complicated. Joseph's whole story is found in Genesis chapters 39 through 50. But for our purposes today, we're just going to kind of sum it up. Joseph's story takes some turns now. He ends up in jail for a while, but eventually gets out and ends up by Pharaoh's direct command in charge of all of Egypt. It's not such a bad outcome for the kid who was sold into slavery by his brothers. So years go by. Years go by. And in the middle of a famine in Egypt, Joseph's brothers came by looking for food. They were starving. But they don't know that Joseph is there. The last time they saw him was him being carried away, newly sold as a slave. So they arrive, and they don't recognize him. But Joseph sees them, and he recognizes them. He knows that's his brothers. Would you ever be able to forget the faces of the people who hurt you so deeply? I don't think so. And Joseph remembers them. He sees them. He knows it's his brothers. He recognizes them first off. Then comes the moment of truth. Because when Joseph encounters his brothers, it would have been the perfect opportunity for Joseph to have his revenge. You see, Joseph was in a level of power where he could have killed them just by the snap of his fingers. That's it. Nobody would have even questioned him why. Because he had that much power. Joseph could have got his revenge right then and there. But Joseph doesn't want that. Joseph tells them who he is, and they're terrified. They don't know what to do. And then Joseph says, "Come close to me." Now, wouldn't you be totally freaking out at this moment if you were one of his brothers? You threw this guy into a pit. You were going to leave him for dead, but then you just sell him into slavery, and now he says, "Hey, come here." I'd be a little nervous. And, that's one of those things like, yeah, okay, I guess I'll come here, but what do you want? And try to keep your distance a little bit. But they do. They do come close. And when they had done so, he, who was Joseph, said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one who you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." Wow. Now that's the story of a guy who had forgiven, who had done the hard work to get past the offense that was done to him. And he was determined to heal, and he went after it. Joseph forgave his brothers. How do we know? Perspective. He could look in the eyes of the ones who had hurt him the most, who had caused him the most grief, and he could see beyond his own hurt to God's intention, to God's purpose. Look again at what Joseph told his brothers after reminding them of the wrong they committed. He said, "Do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here." Wow. Do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here. You see, only a healed person can reassure the ones who had wronged him and say this to him. And then Joseph goes on to say this. He says, "God sent me ahead of you." You see, Joseph gave more credit to God than he did his pain or to his brother's intentions. God was the center of this story. Not the wrong that was done to him. God was at the center. In other words, taking his hurt to God, seeing his pain in light of God, allowed Joseph to heal. Allowed him to reach that healing. Here's what I know about pain. It can absolutely consume you. And when it hurts bad enough, it becomes your whole world, everything you think about, everything that you see reminds you of it, and it hurts. Here's what I know about forgiveness. You won't ever fully heal and get past the pain. You will not fully forgive until you decide that your hurt and your pain will not consume you anymore. It won't. Until you decide that restoration is more important than revenge, that's not going to happen. That is how you begin to make progress. That is how you get the ball rolling. You have to make the decision to do something. To physically let it go. To move on. To get over it. To forgive. You have to make that decision. Joseph, honestly, could have wasted years and years and years away, repaying this very wound that was done to him. He could have got revenge for many years to come because of their hatred, because of their jealousy, and because of their sin. He could have done all those things. He could have made the decision to forgive, but never make any progress because he had never chosen to see past the offense, to heal from it. But he did. He knew that in order to heal, he needed to be able to see what we call the bigger picture. He needed to see what was going on. He wasn't going to let his pain in his life ruin it. He wasn't going to let that pain ruin his life. It wasn't going to determine who he was or who he was going to be. He was not going to let that hurt and that pain make him who he was. He wasn't going to let that pain define him. Joseph knew that in order to fully forgive, you need to do more than just cope. You need to heal. You need to see past the hurt, past the pain, to something bigger, something better. Joseph did that because he saw God's involvement. You know you're on the path to healing and consistent forgiveness, not just coping, when your pain no longer defines you anymore, but God's truth does. It happens when you realize you are a product of your hurt, but you are a product of your God. You see, God can and He will do something through you, with you, in you. You see, He can work around your pain, around your hurt, and He can make something good come out of it. He sees you as more than what hurt you, than what was done to you, than what was wrong in your life. He sees you more than that. And He wants you to see yourself as more than that too. That's when forgiveness happens. That is when the healing happens. Okay, now, I don't know about you guys, but we go through paper towels like crazy in our house. Like, just madness. We use it for everything. I mean, it's just crazy. You know, spill, clean, let's clean the windows, everything. It's good for everything. Honestly, paper towels is very useful. Now, a lot of times people in their houses, they usually just throw away the rolls. You know, unless there's kids in the house. Now, if there's kids in the house, you pass them along, right? You pass along these little cardboard tubes. Because they use them for everything. They have the imagination. They use them for absolutely everything. They use them for microphones, for swords, for telescopes, whatever. Okay? Now, have any of you ever looked through a roll of a paper towel? Don't lie. I know you have. Okay. Now the world on the end of that roll seems a lot smaller, doesn't it? You see, you lose all sense of perspective of everything around you. You just see that very tiny picture on the other end of the roll. when we simply cope with our hurt and we don't forgive, we live our lives like we're looking through the end of a paper towel. We only see hurt at the end. We can't find God in our small little view that we have. So our hurt becomes all that we can see. Instead of the purpose that God has for all of us, all we see is that little hurt at the end. You see, God does have a purpose. In spite of the sometimes tough things we go through, in spite of the hurt that we've experienced, God does have a purpose for our lives. You see, healing from forgiveness is choosing to put down the paper towel roll, to get rid of it. It is choosing to give our hurt the right kind of perspective. You see, we need to see the whole picture. It's not denying your pain. It's not letting anyone off the hook. Okay? It's not about that at all. It's not saying that what has been done to you or what has been said to you isn't a big deal. It's saying that those things no longer have the power to define who you are or the purpose that God has for you. You see, it doesn't have that power anymore. You have given it up. You have allowed that power to be taken. It is no longer going to define you or God's purpose in your life. So how do you make amends? How do you do more than just cope? How do you begin to heal? You keep on forgiving. Forgiveness is an event, but healing is a process, which is something that you have to commit to every single day. You have to commit to healing. Decide every day that you're going to let it go, that you're going to release it. Just let it go. Say it out loud if you have to. Pray about it. Name what has been done to you in your prayer. What was taken? How were you wrong? What was said? Be specific with God. And then ask God to heal the precise hurt that was done to you. To fix whatever was broken and to help you to be able to let it go. And finally, ask God to help you trust Him and somehow see the bigger picture. So that you can see past the pain, past the hurt of what has happened to you. And that you can begin to see what God is up to in your life. This is how you allow God to determine your perspective and not your pain. You see, that's what you want. You want God to give you perspective. Not your pain, not your hurt. You want God to control. This is how you begin to see your life as something God is working in and working on, and not something that is defined by the pain. This is how you move forward past all of the hurt in your life. This is how you come to terms with the pain being in your life, but not being your whole life. By choosing forgiveness over and over and over again. If it hasn't happened already, and I'm sure it has, there will come a time when you are going to be hurt. You're going to be wronged in some way. It's going to happen. When you will be offered the chance to forgive or not. To heal or to cope. And for the sake of your future, for the sake of your happiness, you need to choose to forgive. You have to. You need to be able to move forward. You need to see your pain as part of a bigger picture. You need God to have more control and more credit than you will ever give your hurt or your pain. And to be able to do that,